16.5 thousand feet, they saw a second missile heading towards the plane, so they had no choice but to continue the maneuver and rise the plane again very quickly to avoid the second missile. Because the plane it was not equipped for this type of maneuver due to its heavy weight. At an altitude of 24,000 feet, the second missile hit it, specifically at the tail. On October 31st, 1999, world-renowned EgyptAir Flight 990 set off from Los Angeles International Airport, destined for Cairo International Airport with a stopover at John F. Kennedy International Airport, New York City. The Boeing 767-300ER soared into the sky, its wings cutting through the night air, carrying 217 passengers and crew members toward their destinations, dreams, and futures. An aura of routine surrounded the flight as seasoned pilot Ahmed El-Habashi and co-pilot Gamil El-Batouti, supported by Adel Anwar and Raouf Mohideen, manned the cockpit. The passengers fell into the rhythm of long-haul travel. Some slept, some read, some chatted quietly over the drone of the aircraft engines. Suddenly, an hour after takeoff from JFK, the unimaginable struck. The plane plunged into the Atlantic Ocean about 60 miles south of Nantucket Island, Massachusetts. All 217 lives on board were lost in an instant. The shockwaves of the tragedy rippled across the globe, leaving families and nations grappling for answers. The U.S. National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, led the investigation with an unwavering commitment to uncover the truth. Their findings suggested an unimaginable act. Co-pilot Gamil El-Batouti had deliberately downed the plane, having spoken the words, "I trust in God," just moments before the crash. The cockpit recordings and flight data records revealed no technical fault, pointing instead to an act of intentional destruction. The Egyptian government and El-Batouti's family recoiled at such conclusions. They refused to accept that one of their own could commit such an act. EgyptAir dispatched a team of experts to independently investigate the wreckage. Meanwhile, former Egyptian President Hosni Mubarak rejected the suicide theory outright, labeling the tragedy as an act of sabotage. The divide between the NTSB's findings and the Egyptian counterclaims left a chasm in the narrative, one filled with speculation, grief, and political undertones. Families of the victims found themselves caught in a limbo of unanswered questions and conflicting reports, their mourning tinged with the bitter taste of unresolved truth. To this day, Flight 990 serves as a somber reminder of the fragility of life at 35,000 feet and the complexities that can surround a tragedy in the high-stakes realm of international aviation. In the early hours of November 1999, chaos erupted at 35,000 feet above the Atlantic Ocean. EgyptAir Flight 990, en route from Los Angeles to Cairo, never reached its destination. The Airbus A300 plunged into the ocean, killing all 217 passengers and crew members on board. Authority figures quickly concealed facts surrounding the accident, primarily based on the assumption that the Egyptian co-pilot, Gamil El-Batouti, had deliberately caused the crash. This premise stemmed from the sentence he uttered, recorded by the black box, "I trust in God." The implications were severe. EgyptAir would be liable for compensation, its reputation tarnished, and the burden of responsibility lifted from U.S. security services. Investigations unfolded with the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, supported by the FAA, FBI, Boeing, and the U.S. Coast Guard, concluding that co-pilot Gamil El-Batouti's control inputs were deliberate, leading to the fateful crash. However, the portrait of Batouti was complex. Contrary to the NTSB's conclusions, many friends and relatives described him as a devout and moral man, father to 5 children, notorious for his religiosity and upright conduct. Batouti had joined EgyptAir in 1987, but was no stranger to aviation. He had previously served as a pilot in the Egyptian Air Force and accumulated around 15,000 flying hours, over a third on Boeing 767 aircraft. Over his 35 years in service, he had also trained numerous pilots, both in the Egyptian Air Force and civil aviation. Just months before the crash, Batouti faced a dire personal predicament. With a daughter who required expensive medical treatment covered only as long as he was employed, his sudden termination would cease her medical coverage. Yet, in the event of his death on duty, the insurance would persist for his family. This duality cast a shadow over his actions and motivations during that fateful flight. The tragedy of EgyptAir Flight 990 remains shrouded in controversy, a tangle of human motives and mechanical mysteries. While the official narrative framed Batouti as a man who chose a tragic end, those who knew him depict a loyal father and dedicated pilot, forever caught between suspicion and sympathy. The truth, it seems, lies somewhere between the dark abyss of the ocean and the impartial skies above. In the annals of aviation history, the crash of EgyptAir Flight 990 in October 1999 remains one of the most puzzling incidents. The Boeing 767, bound from New York to Cairo, plunged into the Atlantic Ocean, killing all 217 aboard. Official investigations concluded that the plane's co-pilot, Gamil El-Batouti, was responsible, suggesting he deliberately brought the plane down. However, this conclusion has been hotly contested. According to the testimony of a German pilot who was on a nearby flight path, he witnessed an unidentified object moving towards the Egyptian plane just seconds before it plummeted. This observation sparked theories that external factors, not El-Batouti's actions, led to the disaster. Adding to the intrigue, Walid, El-Batouti's nephew, claims that the flight was targeted. He points out that an important military delegation of 33 individuals, including 3 nuclear experts, was on board. Additionally, 7 oil experts were also among the passengers. These assertions suggest a motive more sinister than personal despair. Critics of the official report argue that the autopilot failed multiple times, even before the fateful flight. Walid asserts that the same autopilot system experienced failures during previous flights on domestic routes. The autopilot's final failure occurred after takeoff from New York, a fact Walid believes exonerates his uncle. The official report by the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board held El-Batouti accountable, emphasizing his last words, "I trust in God." However, it failed to explain his intentions behind disengaging the autopilot. Family members and local media voiced their doubts, suggesting that El-Batouti, known for his religious devotion and professional success, had no reason to commit suicide. The reverse thruster helps to stop the plane in a short time when it lands on the ground by reversing the air movement inside the engine. Instead of transferring air pressure from the front to the back to make the plane move, the reverse thruster transfers air pressure from the back to the front, thus helping to stop the plane. The plane gains its tremendous speed from the ability of its engines to quickly draw in a large amount of air, then compress it, mix it with fuel in the combustion chamber, and finally expel it at a higher speed through the exhaust cylinder. Here, the plane gains forward motion. The air inside the engine is usually compressed to a pressure of about 30 times its original pressure, and when it is expelled with this force through the narrow exhaust cylinders, the aircraft moves forward, just as an inflated balloon flies when it is suddenly deflated. Thus, the power of the reverse thruster becomes apparent, which only works when the aircraft is safely on the ground, to divert the air coming out of the engine exhaust cylinders forward. Therefore, the reverse thrusters are usually installed near the exhaust cylinders, either externally or internally. Dr. Muhammad Ibrahim Muawad's scientific report raises some critical observations about a plane crash that is shrouded in mystery and grave implications. A significant detail highlighted by Dr. Muhammad Ibrahim is the 2-hour delay of the plane's takeoff, which he suggests is a crucial element in understanding the chain of events that led to its eventual demise. The delay in departure is not just a trivial occurrence, but a pivotal factor that suggests prior planning for a possible sabotage. Such a delay means that the plane was not listed on the flight map in time and received no notification regarding its exact route. This late notification resulted in the plane taking off without being properly included on the flight map. As a result of this bypass protocol, the airport authorities allowed the plane to ascend before receiving formal approval to update its route on the map. This oversight had a profound consequence. The aircraft remained unlisted on radar and was not integrated into the air defense system's computer. Consequently, when the plane appeared unannounced in the airspace, the air defense mechanisms identified it as an enemy target and launched missiles to bring it down. The situation worsened with reports of electronic interference. This interference caused a deviation from the plane's intended path, a deviation that was not corrected by ground guidance and monitoring stations at the airport. The failure to correct the path could be attributed to either an intentional neglect from the ground station or interference in the communication channels between the pilot and the ground station. Supporting this is the data broadcasted by the relevant authority, which confirmed the loss of communication between the aircraft and the ground guidance station 3 minutes before its crash. This period of communication blackout was vital. It was just enough time for the plane to enter what is termed the destruction zone, where it became a target for the air defense missile systems. Ultimately, this scientific report by Dr. Mohammed Ibrahim illuminates how a series of delays, electronic obstructions, and communication failures culminated in a tragic incident, painting a picture of a premeditated act of adversity that led to catastrophic consequences. None of the pilots felt what was being plotted against them outside the plane, as the plane was flying at its normal altitude of 33,000 feet using the autopilot. Suddenly, the pilot Batouti noticed that the plane began to deviate from its normal course after seeing unfamiliar scenes that were not present in the plane's normal course. At first, he thought that this was due to a malfunction in the autopilot, so he immediately disconnected it to return the plane to its normal course. At this moment, he was surprised by a missile heading towards the plane. At this moment, the Egyptian pilot Ahmed El-Habashi entered, and after assessing the situation, asked Batouti to help him by saying, "Help me," or "Hold on with me." They lost contact with the ground guidance and follow-up station. They had no choice but to make a sharp maneuver and land the plane very quickly from an altitude of 33,000 feet to 16,000 feet in order to avoid colliding with the first missile. Indeed, the plane escaped danger. At an altitude of 16.5 thousand feet, they saw a second missile heading towards the plane, so they had no choice but to continue the maneuver and rise the plane again very quickly to avoid the second missile. Because the plane was not equipped for this type of maneuver due to its heavy weight. At an altitude of 24,000 feet, the second missile hit it, specifically at the tail, which led to its explosion and caused a very large discharge in the air of the destruction area, resulting in the explosion of the passengers' bodies into human tissue that fell with the wreckage of the plane and the wreckage of the missile into the Atlantic Ocean. There is substantial evidence suggesting that the plane was brought down by a missile. Initial indications of a premeditated cover-up include the intentional delay in broadcasting the disaster information. The first statement only confirmed the plane's loss, and an hour later it was revealed that the plane had crashed into the Atlantic Ocean. This delay likely aimed to allow missile debris, which would serve as physical evidence, to vanish. Another compelling element supporting this theory is the nature of the remains found at the crash site. Only human tissue was discovered, not the bodies of the passengers. Such a gruesome scenario indicates extreme air pressure following a tail explosion caused by a second missile, as a conventional plane explosion wouldn't reduce bodies to mere tissue. Additionally, the Egyptian pilots executed an extreme maneuver that wouldn't align with a typical explosive incident. An equally disturbing piece of evidence is the partial and selective release of the black box contents. This withholding appears to be a strategic move to avoid revealing any missile-related details captured in communications between the crew and ground station, or among the flight crew members themselves. Furthermore, the recorded sound of the missile explosion might have been caught by the black box before it cut off communication 3 minutes prior to the crash. Another chilling hint of foul play is the complete destruction of the cockpit, an anomaly given its strong construction designed to protect the flight crew. In a natural and non-violent accident, the cockpit should have remained largely intact. That it didn't implies the presence of explosive materials or a missile attack that led to its total obliteration. These pieces of evidence collectively point towards a dark truth masked by a web of deliberate obfuscations, suggesting that the catastrophe that befell the plane was anything but an accident.